Malaysia Airlines flight with 239 people on board, including 4 Americans, has gone missing.
The last words spoken from Malaysia Airlines. Flight 370 still echo across the world. Good night, Malaysian 370.
Good night, Malaysian 370.
At first they sounded like a simple farewell, yet today they carry the weight of a tragedy that has no equal in modern aviation. On March 8, 2014, a Boeing 777 with 239 people on board vanished into the night, leaving families without answers and investigators chasing shadows for more than a decade. This was not just the loss of a plane, it was the birth of the greatest mystery of our time. But what made those 6 words so chilling? The night of March 8, 2014 began like any other departure at Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Yet each detail matters because it shows how normal everything looked before the shock arrived. Passengers lined up with passports, families exchanged quick hugs, and airline staff checked documents while luggage belts rumbled. Flight MH370, a Boeing 777 heading to Beijing, was cleared after inspections, and the route looked straightforward with calm weather, open skies, and no warnings from dispatch or meteorology. The crew profile inspired confidence, since Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah had more than 18,000 hours of experience, and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid was well-trained and close to promotion. Each step matched standard practice, and that order is important because it explains why what followed felt impossible. The departure sequence was precise, and numbers helped us see the pattern as the aircraft pushed back at 12:41 a.m. and lifted off a minute later. The jet climbed smoothly, and controllers tracked the target while the cabin settled into a quiet rhythm, with safety checks finished, seatbelts fastened, and cabin lights dimmed. For about 40 minutes, the flight behaved exactly as planned, maintaining a cruising altitude near 35,000 feet while heading northeast along the airway toward the Vietnamese boundary. Routine radio calls confirmed position and level, and nothing in the captain's voice suggested stress because his tone was even, his words were clear, and his timing matched procedure.
Malaysian 370, maintaining level 350.
Malaysian 370.
Malaysian 370, maintaining level 350.
Inside, many travelers closed their eyes and others scrolled through movies or music, while the steady hum of engines masked every small vibration. Context matters for understanding risk, so remember that the Boeing 777 has a strong safety record, and long-haul crews trained to manage failures using layered backups. Navigation, communication, and surveillance systems carry redundancy, and no single fault should remove an aircraft from multiple networks at once. Transponders answer interrogations from ground radar, while the aircraft communications, addressing and reporting system sends automated data messages that supplement voice exchanges. When these channels look normal, pilots and controllers relax into a low alert state, common on healthy flights that follow the plan. That confidence would soon be tested, and the test began in a narrow slice of airspace that sits between 2 control centers. At 1:19 a.m., the handover to Ho Chi Minh Control approached, and Captain Zahare transmitted a simple farewell that sounded routine to everyone who heard it. He said,
Good night, Malaysian 370.
"Good night, Malaysian 370, and the frequency fell quiet, which made sense since aircraft often switch channels during border transfers. 2 minutes later, at 1:21 a.m., the transponder stopped replying, and secondary radar no longer displayed the symbol that marks identity, altitude, and speed. Vietnamese controllers expected an initial call, yet no voice arrived, and attempts to reach the crew brought silence, which is extremely rare on scheduled flights. The aircraft continued forward in darkness, but on civilian screens it no longer existed, and that sudden absence forced a scramble that began far from the truth. The crucial point of this chapter is that everything looked orderly until the final exchange, and the change that came afterward was abrupt, targeted, and chilling. If a modern jet can vanish within minutes during a routine border handoff, then what happened in those 2 minutes, and who decided the next move? The 6 final words spoken from flight MH370 sounded ordinary, yet they marked the last confirmed trace of human contact with the aircraft. "Good night, Malaysian 370" was received at 1:19 a.m., and at that moment, no one imagined the transmission would soon become one of the most studied phrases in aviation history. 2 minutes later, the transponder went dark, and the silence that followed was not a mistake in the system, but a calculated turning point that created an invisible gap between the plane and the world below. To understand why this moment is so disturbing, we need to consider how air traffic control works. Airspace is divided into zones, and each zone is monitored by a center. When an aircraft moves from one country's zone to another, the controller hands over responsibility. During those few minutes, both centers expect contact, but neither has full control until the switch is complete. This transition window is the weakest point in monitoring, and MH370 disappeared right in that window. It means whoever disabled the system either had precise knowledge or acted with remarkable timing. The sudden silence confused controllers in both Malaysia and Vietnam. Vietnamese operators waited for MH370 to report its entry into their airspace, but nothing came. They tried to call, but every attempt failed. At the same time, Malaysian controllers believed the flight had already moved out of their zone, so they did not react immediately. This confusion delayed the alarm and allowed the aircraft to vanish without interception. It was a perfect gap, exploited at the exact second when oversight was weakest. From the perspective of the passengers, nothing unusual was visible. Cabin lights glowed softly, engines hummed, and the jet kept a steady altitude. Most people were asleep, unaware that systems keeping them connected to the outside world had been switched off. The disconnection was not only technical, but also symbolic. 239 people were now isolated inside a metal body, flying through the night, unseen and unheard. The difference between normality and mystery was only 2 minutes, and that thin margin has fueled endless debate ever since. Experts later highlighted that the last words carried subtle weight. The captain did not mention any abnormal conditions, nor did he signal stress. The words were smooth, almost casual, yet analysis years later suggested faint signs of tension hidden within his tone. If this is true, then the farewell was more than routine. It may have been a coded message or an attempt to sound calm while facing pressure. This possibility adds another layer of fear, because it means the cockpit might not have been as controlled as it sounded. The phrase, "Good night, Malaysian 370" has since become a haunting reminder of how fragile communication can be. It represents the boundary between certainty and speculation, between routine and disappearance. Once the words were spoken, the aircraft slipped into silence, leaving the world to guess what happened next. And if the systems were turned off deliberately, then who was responsible for making an advanced airliner disappear so completely? When flight MH370 vanished from civilian radar, the first conclusion seemed obvious: something had gone wrong over the South China Sea. Search and rescue teams from Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and Thailand rushed into action, sending ships and aircraft to sweep the waters east of the Malay Peninsula. Families gathered at Beijing's airport waited anxiously, believing the plane had crashed somewhere along its planned route. For days, the world's attention was locked onto the wrong stretch of ocean. The logic behind this mistake was straightforward. The last civilian radar contact had placed the jet near Vietnamese airspace, so investigators assumed the crash site had to be nearby. Rescue ships scanned the waves for oil slicks or floating debris, while helicopters flew low across the sea surface. Satellites were tasked with capturing images, and governments released updates almost hourly. Yet nothing appeared, not even a single confirmed fragment. The sea looked empty, as if the Boeing had dissolved into the dark water. Those wasted days were critical. Experts know that the first 48 hours after an accident are the most important for saving lives, because survivors have limited time before exhaustion or exposure takes over. By focusing on the wrong area, investigators lost their best chance. Every hour without evidence deepened the despair of families, and soon the hope of rescue gave way to confusion. It became clear that this disappearance was unlike any aviation emergency seen before. Behind the scenes, a different picture was emerging. Malaysian military radar had tracked an unidentified object making a sharp turn west, crossing the Malay Peninsula and then heading toward the Strait of Malacca. At first, this information was not shared, partly due to hesitation and partly due to political concerns. Revealing that a large aircraft had crossed national airspace undetected raised questions about national defense. The delay meant that while hundreds of ships searched in the South China Sea, the real path of the jet was being ignored. This misdirection highlighted how fragile international coordination can be during crises. Malaysia struggled to manage the investigation, while China, with the majority of passengers on board, pushed hard for answers. Other countries hesitated, waiting for leadership, and valuable time slipped away. The absence of transparency gave space for speculation, and the world began to suspect that something more deliberate had taken place. Looking back, the false search in the South China Sea stands as a haunting reminder of how easily assumptions can fail. An entire ocean floor was scanned in detail, yet years later, we know with certainty that MH370 never fell there. The aircraft had already turned, flying along a hidden route that would take it far away from the eyes of searchers. By the time investigators realized the truth, the trail was colder, the mystery deeper, and the chances of recovery had almost disappeared. The question that remains is simple but devastating. If the first search had been directed to the right place, could MH370 have been found before it slipped into the endless waters of the southern Indian Ocean? The search in the South China Sea had produced nothing, and investigators were running out of explanations until a surprising clue came from space. A British company called Inmarsat, which operates communication satellites, revealed that MH370 had continued sending handshakes long after the transponder went silent. These handshakes were not full messages, but small pings, the kind of signals used to confirm that a system is still connected. For 7 hours after contact was lost, the aircraft and satellite exchanged these signals. That meant the jet was still flying, while the world believed it had already crashed. To understand the importance of these pings, imagine a phone that has no service but still connects to a tower to check in. Each handshake did not give an exact location, yet it created arcs that showed possible positions of the aircraft at different times. By analyzing the timing of the signals, experts could calculate distance, which narrowed the plane's path into two giant corridors. One stretched north toward Central Asia, while the other curved south deep into the Indian Ocean. The northern path was quickly dismissed because no military radar along that route reported a large unidentified aircraft. That left the southern arc, a place more isolated than almost anywhere else on Earth. The conclusion was devastating. If MH370 had flown south for hours, it must have ended its journey in the open Indian Ocean, far from any land or runway. This was not a region where emergency landings were possible, and fuel limits meant the plane could not fly forever. The data suggested that after 7 hours, the jet had finally gone down in waters thousands of meters deep. The idea of such a controlled disappearance unsettled investigators because it showed someone had deliberately guided the aircraft far away from help. The discovery shifted the entire search strategy. Instead of the South China Sea, international teams redirected resources to the remote southern Indian Ocean. Australia took the lead because the projected crash site was closest to its territory. Ships carrying advanced sonar systems and underwater drones began scanning the seabed, a place so unexplored that even basic maps did not exist. This was like searching for a needle in a haystack the size of a continent. Families reacted with disbelief. For a week, they had hoped their loved ones might have landed on some remote island or survived on life rafts. The Inmarsat data erased those hopes, replacing them with the grim reality that MH370 had likely ended in one of the most unforgiving oceans in the world. The news triggered anger too, because it meant the early search in the South China Sea had been a waste. Every hour spent in the wrong waters had moved the real trail further out of reach. The satellite evidence changed the narrative from an accident to a mystery with deliberate actions. It proved the plane did not simply fall from the sky, but traveled for hours into emptiness. The haunting question then shifted. Why would anyone guide 239 people into the middle of nowhere? And what happened in the final minutes before the signal stopped forever? Once the Inmarsat data pointed south, the search for MH370 entered one of the most difficult environments on Earth. The southern Indian Ocean is vast, remote, and unpredictable, with waves taller than houses and storms that can last for days. Australia took the lead in the search, coordinating fleets of ships and aircraft that were equipped with the best tools available. Yet the ocean floor in that region was almost completely unmapped, which meant investigators first had to chart the seabed before they could even begin looking for wreckage. Advanced sonar systems were deployed, and underwater drones scanned mile after mile of deep water. The technology revealed underwater mountains and trenches that had never been recorded before, a reminder that much of our planet remains unexplored. Despite 2 years of effort and more than 120,000 square kilometers covered, not a single confirmed piece of the main wreckage was found. The cost climbed into hundreds of millions of dollars, but what stung even more was the lack of closure. Families continued to wait for answers, yet the ocean seemed determined to keep its secret. Hope returned only when small fragments began to appear far from the suspected crash site. In July 2015, a flaperon washed ashore on Réunion Island, thousands of kilometers from the southern search zone. Later, other pieces such as interior panels and landing gear parts were discovered along the coasts of Madagascar, Mozambique, and Tanzania. Oceanographers explain that powerful currents can carry wreckage across entire oceans, which is why the debris ended up scattered along African shores. These fragments proved beyond doubt that MH370 had indeed gone down in the Indian Ocean, but they did not reveal where the main fuselage lay. For the families, each discovery was bittersweet. The fragments were physical evidence that their loved ones were gone, yet they were only scattered pieces, not the full story. Without the black boxes, the cockpit voice recorder, and the flight data recorder, no one could know what had happened during those last hours. The missing recorders became symbols of frustration, reminders that technology had failed to answer the one question everyone needed: why did this plane vanish? The search also raised deeper issues about how little we know about the oceans. In trying to find MH370, scientists mapped undersea landscapes never documented before, yet the aircraft itself remained hidden. It showed that even with modern technology, nature can still overpower human effort. Every expedition ended with more questions than answers, and each failed attempt added to the sense of mystery. The fragments confirmed the crash, but they also confirmed something else: that the full truth lay somewhere in an ocean so deep and hostile that it resisted every attempt to uncover it. And if even the strongest ships and most advanced drones could not locate MH370, what does that say about the secrets still hidden beneath the waves? When the wreckage confirmed MH370 had ended in the Indian Ocean, the mystery only grew darker. If the plane flew for 7 hours after its last contact, then someone had to be in control. The question was who and why. Investigators began to study theories that were disturbing, each carrying heavy consequences. The first and most discussed possibility was pilot involvement. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah became the focus of intense scrutiny because of the timing of the shutdowns and the deliberate route. Experts pointed to his home flight simulator, where a practice route into the southern Indian Ocean had been discovered. To some, this was a chilling clue, a rehearsal for the real event. Supporters of this theory argued that only someone in the cockpit could disable systems so precisely, steer across national borders, and maintain control for hours. Yet others insisted there was no proof of his intent, and his long career did not suggest he was capable of such an act. A second theory centered on the first officer, Farik Abdul Hamid. He was younger and on one of his final training flights, which meant he carried pressure to perform. Some suggested he could have suffered a psychological crisis, but there was no evidence, and people who knew him described him as calm and professional. Still, the idea of a lone act from inside the cockpit could not be dismissed. The possibility of hijacking was also investigated. For weeks after the disappearance, officials checked the passenger list for suspicious names or connections. No terrorist group claimed responsibility, and the passengers showed no links to extremist networks. Skeptics argued that if hijackers had been involved, they would not have flown silently for 7 hours into nowhere. Terrorism usually leaves a message, and this event left none. Mechanical failure was considered too, though most experts doubted it. The Boeing 777 is built with multiple backups, and the odds of every communication system failing at the same time are almost zero. Even if such a failure had occurred, the plane would have likely descended quickly, not flown across the ocean for hours. The data showed clear, deliberate navigation, not chaos. Some theories stepped into the world of cyber interference. Could someone have hacked into the aircraft's systems from the ground? Aviation engineers dismiss this, explaining that MH370's design did not allow remote control. The idea of a cyber hijack captured public imagination but lacked technical support. In the end, none of the theories fully explained every detail. Pilot involvement seemed possible but unproven, hijacking felt unlikely without demands, and technical failure clashed with the deliberate flight path. This absence of a clear answer only made the tragedy more haunting. The terrifying truth may be that someone carefully planned for the plane to vanish, using the perfect moment between air traffic zones and guiding it into the most isolated ocean on Earth. But if that is true, then the question becomes even more unsettling. What motive could justify sending 239 lives into oblivion, and who carried that secret to the grave? Even after years of searching, Flight MH370 has never been fully recovered, and that absence has become part of its legacy. For the families of the 239 people on board, the lack of closure is a wound that never heals. They gathered at airports, marched in protests, and wrote letters to governments, demanding answers. Some received fragments of wreckage, but fragments cannot replace truth, and grief lingers when there is no complete story. The disappearance also changed aviation forever. Before MH370, the idea that a modern jet could vanish without trace seemed impossible. Airlines trusted multiple radar systems, satellites, and communication channels to prevent such mysteries. Yet this event proved that in certain conditions, even the most advanced aircraft can slip into silence. In response, the industry introduced new safety measures. Regulators pushed for real-time tracking of aircraft, requiring systems that send location updates every few minutes instead of once an hour. Some carriers now use streaming black box technology designed to transmit critical flight data to satellites if something goes wrong. But these improvements came too late for the passengers of MH370. Families have criticized officials for reacting slowly, for protecting reputations rather than sharing data quickly.
Masses projected assumptions of where the plane was supposed to be.
The delays in confirming the jet's path created space for conspiracy theories that continue today. Some believe governments know more than they admit, while others think the truth has been buried for political reasons. The secrecy surrounding military radar reports and the uncertainty about the final moments fueled suspicion instead of trust. For the wider public, MH370 became a symbol of how fragile control really is. We live in a world of constant surveillance, where phones track our movements and satellites scan the globe. Yet one passenger jet carrying hundreds of lives could still vanish without explanation. That contradiction is what keeps the case alive in collective memory. It reminds us that technology does not guarantee certainty, and that the ocean can still swallow human effort whole. The cultural impact of MH370 is just as deep. Books, documentaries, and debates continue to revisit the tragedy, searching for meaning in the silence. Each anniversary brings vigils, and each new discovery of debris reopens the wound. For young people who followed the story online, it became one of the defining mysteries of their generation, a reminder that not everything can be solved by data and science. The haunting legacy of MH370 is not only about the lives lost, but also about the questions left behind. It stands as a warning to governments, to airlines, and to society itself. Never assume that safety is absolute. Even in the 21st century, mystery and uncertainty still exist. And perhaps that is the most unsettling truth, because if one modern aircraft can vanish without a trace, what else might the world lose without explanation? Flight MH370 is more than a tragedy. It is a reminder of how fragile certainty can be in our modern world. Despite satellites, global networks, and years of searching, 239 lives vanished into silence, leaving only fragments as proof. The ocean still guards its secret, and the unanswered questions continue to echo across nations. This mystery haunts not only families, but also governments and scientists who still struggle to explain how a modern jet could disappear. And perhaps the most haunting question of all remains: will the truth of MH370 ever rise from the depths, or will it stay lost forever? What do you think happened to MH370 in those final hours? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we uncover more mysteries the world still hides.